Today is the 24th of June, 2004. This is the beginning of an interview with Bernard Manowitz at the Hilton Hotel, Horseheads, New York. Is it Dr. Manowitz? Mr. Manowitz is 82 years old.
You're right.
And was born in Jersey City, New Jersey on March 6, 1922. I am Lee Kiesling, and I'm doing the interview. Mr. Manowitz, when did you first join up with the Army and get involved with the Manhattan Project?
Well, I was inducted into the Army in February of 1943. I was in the Army for about a year before I was associated with the Manhattan Project. Part of that time I was in the Airborne Engineers as a water supply foreman. Another part of that time I was in ASTP, both at the University of New Hampshire and at VPI. And it was from VPI I got the orders to go to Oak Ridge.
So you started off with just in the Army, where did you report?
First I was in basic training.
Yes,
at Shepherd's Field, Texas.
Shepherd's Field, Texas. Then you went?
Then I went to the Airborne Engineers in Bradley Field, Connecticut.
And from there?
From there I went to University of New Hampshire. From there to Virginia Polytechnic Institute. And from there I got the orders to go to Oak Ridge, which were classified orders.
Had you graduated from college before?
I graduated 2 weeks before I was inducted into the Army.
Were you
I was a chemical engineer.
So they knew somewhere your background.
My record indicated that I had a chemical engineering background. That's probably why I was selected.
Why you went to these different places.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So you went to VPI, and after then you went to
Oak Ridge.
And how long were you there?
I was in Oak Ridge in the Army about 2 years. Then I was discharged, and I stayed on at what was then Monsanto Clinton Laboratories for another 6 months. From there I went to Columbia for a master's degree. From there I went to Brookhaven National Laboratory, where I worked for 51 years until I retired.
Now this was as a civilian.
Yes, of course.
Well, okay. What was it like when you first were sent to Oak Ridge? I mean, was there any indoctrination, or your living quarters?
Well, let me tell you what happened.
Okay.
While I was at VPI, I received orders, which were classified orders, to go to Knoxville, Tennessee, go to a telephone, and call this telephone number.
Sounds like James Bond.
Which I did.
Yeah.
And voice answered the other end and said this was Sergeant, whatever his name was the first sergeant. And I said, I'm reporting for duty. He said, stay right where you are, I'll pick you up. So I stayed at the railroad station until the Jeep came along with the first sergeant in it. When I got in, I said, where's the Army camp around here, Sarge? He said, there isn't any Army camp. It's just a tremendous industrial group that's working night and day, and there are thousands of girls here. So I said, well, this sounds like pretty good duty. He says, it's fine. So on we went until we finally arrived at the Oak Ridge Reservation. Now, the first thing that happened then was that I was interviewed by a major. And the first thing the major did was to shake my hand. I knew something was wrong because I was a private first class, and majors don't shake your hand. He says, we need your expertise in this particular project you're involved in. You'll hear all about it later. And that was about all that happened the first day. And then we were sent to a barrack. I say barrack singular because there was only one barrack set up there that day. The next day, there were about 20 barracks already built in a single day. That gives you some idea of the tremendous amount of construction that was going on all over the place.
The speed, yes. And the number of people coming in.
It was the next day that I was among the first group of 5 GIs assigned to X-10. And the 5 of us then the next day went on to the X-10 site. At the X-10 site, the first thing that happened was that we were given a security lecture. And that's immediately we were told that we were involved in a program to make an atomic bomb. And immediately we were told that it was an entirely secret project, and that if we whispered a word of it to anybody in the Army at that time, we would be sent to one of the islands in the Pacific as fast as possible. So after that, we were interviewed by various people at Oak Ridge at X-10, and I was assigned to a project at the Oak Ridge at the pile at X-10.
At the what?
This was at that time the nuclear reactors were called piles.
I see.
So this was it was in the so-called 100 area building, and it was the X-10 pile. Now I can tell you a little bit more about what was happening at that time. X-10 was set up as a pilot plant for the production of plutonium, but as a pilot plant for the Hanford facility in the state of Washington. So as a pilot plant, it had the X-10 air-cooled pile, part of the system. It had a separations plant for producing plutonium. It had a semi-works for doing advanced separations technology. And it had other chemistry laboratories that were preparing triggers for the bomb. There were other things there too, but those were the facilities I was most involved in. I was assigned, as I say, to the X-10 pile, and the problem was that the X-10 pile was air-cooled, whereas the Hanford reactors are going to be water-cooled. So they had installed a series of tubes through the reactor, and I was assigned to study the problem of the corrosion of aluminum and the corrosion of stainless steel in the pile, so as we get some ideas of what might happen at the Hanford reactors.
When you went to Oak Ridge, did your family, were you married at the time?
No, I was single.
Did your parents know where you were going and why, or?
No, my parents knew only that I was in the Army, and they would get a postcard every now and then saying, everything is okay, love, Bernie.
But they knew you were in the States?
They knew I was in the States.
Very, very, very curious, or?
No, my parents came from Europe. They understood that I was in the Army, that I was in some sort of a secret project. They didn't ask me any questions.
Well, you answered. Where were you? What was your first impression of Oak Ridge?
Tremendous activity. There were many, many people there. Construction was going on all over the place.
Sounds like more were coming all the time.
And more people were coming all the time. And I did meet a lot of girls there. What was happening was that all these projects, particularly the project outside of X-10, were highly compartmentalized. And all of the processes and all of the experimental work that was going on was in a very small unit, so that one person could do it following a very specific instruction. And there were a lot of young ladies that were involved in doing all of that. So there was this opportunity for a social life as well as the more serious things we were doing both at the laboratory.
Now, did your social life take place on the base? I mean, were there facilities or?
Yeah, there were facilities at Oak Ridge was a little. Well, what happened was that the Army at that time set up the city of Oak Ridge as part of the entire facility that they were building. So it had cafeterias, it had various places where you could come and meet. It had many houses. So it was set up as a small city with everything in it, and there was an opportunity for social activity.
Could you leave? Go on leave, or?
I could only leave. I was given a pass. It was an Army unit, and
Yeah.
I was confined to the Army unit, although we could go in and out of Oak Ridge rather freely. But in order to leave the site, you had to have a pass just like you had in any other Army site.
Okay. Were they granted,
They were granted occasionally. That is, I didn't have too many passes, but we had enough so I could get to Chattanooga or some other place in Tennessee on an overnight pass.
What were you told about security when you, other than keep your mouth shut. But when you arrived, you were given lectures, you say?
We were given security lectures all the time.
One of the questions that here is, were you ever, quote, tested by the military intelligence or the FBI? I mean, were they checking up on you as you worked and as you lived there?
It's possible, but not to the best of my knowledge.
In other words, it wasn't visible.
Nothing was visible.
If it occurred, okay.
I'll tell you one story, however, having to do with security.
Good.
There was a bus that went in between the laboratory site and the barracks and Oak Ridge Village. And I was on the bus one day, which was very crowded, and I was standing. And it just so happened that the director of the X-10 facility was sitting right next to where I was standing, and I was talking to some other GIs standing next to me. The next day when I went to work, I was told to report to the director. I reported back to the director, and he said, "I heard you on that bus last night, and you committed a security breach." I said, "What did I do?" He said, "You talked about UNH, uranyl nitrate hexahydrate." I said, "No, I wasn't talking about uranyl nitrate hexahydrate. I was talking about UNH, the University of New Hampshire."
Oh, no.
So he forgot about the whole incident.
Isn't that amazing? Well, let me see. You said you lived in the barracks. You lived in the barracks all the time. Were they comfortable or
well, it was a standard barracks.
Military
there must have been about 25 or 30 people in the barracks. We all had bunks. There was a cold stove in the middle of the barracks. It was a standard barracks.
How was the food? Military food?
Certainly, it was military food. It was better than some of the other places I had been earlier, but it was just military food. Nothing great about it. However, there was an opportunity sometimes to go into a restaurant at Oak Ridge, so that was possible.
At any time, or were you free to do that?
You had to have permission.
Permission even within Oak Ridge?
Even within Oak Ridge, you couldn't wander around too freely.
Were there zones that you could...
There were zones all over the place. So the only way you can go from place to place is by bus. So you can go by bus from the barracks into Oak Ridge, or you can go by bus, and eventually you can get out of Oak Ridge eventually. But every place you came to, there was some sort of a checkpoint where they checked before you entered into a particular zone.
I see.
So all of the major facilities had checkpoints all around.
It's interesting. Another question, of course, is: did you have any ideas of what was happening? I mean, what you were involved in? And of course,
we were very knowledgeable about what was happening with regards to the production of plutonium. And furthermore, you were
told the minute you got there.
Well, not only were we told, but then we were taught nuclear physics. We had lectures from well-known physicists at least once a week. So that's where I learned whatever nuclear physics I had to learn as well, because that's part of the program that we were involved in. We acquired that knowledge as well as the knowledge of chemical engineering.
Did that help you in your later academics?
It certainly did. It helped me very much throughout my entire career.
How about censorship?
Well, there were no opportunities for publishing during the time.
No, I meant writing letters home or that sort of thing.
I'm sure that some of our letters and postcards were read by the officers in command.
But nobody ever in your family ever mentioned holes cut in the mail?
Well, my letters were very short. There was nothing.
You probably had no time.
I had plenty of time, but I just didn't write long letters.
Did you ever get home on leave at all?
No, I never did. Not during the time I was in the Army. And the funny thing was, I thought I would when I was stationed in Bradley Field, Connecticut, because that's very close to New Jersey, where my parents lived. But in the airborne engineers, I didn't get any passes at all, except for one overnight pass.
So essentially, for a couple of years, they just never saw you.
They never saw me for 3 years.
Well, What about, well, you've sort of described your work, but do you want to go over it again, your activities while involved with the project you were working?
Well, there were two programs I was involved in.
Okay.
One has to do with the corrosion of aluminum and the corrosion of stainless steel in a water-cooled pile. So we had to set up something that was similar to it at the air-cooled pile at Oak Ridge. The other program I was involved in had to do with waste disposal, particularly the recovery of radioactive iodine from off gases from the dissolver at the chemical plant. In both of those cases, well, in the first case, I worked directly on that program with a civilian supervisor, and I had two assistants as well. On the other program, I worked with, again, a civilian supervisor.
Chain of command.
The Army chain of command.
Well, for the whole, for where, however you were. I mean, you know, you were in the Army, but you had an Army chain of command.
In the Army,
civilian too.
In the Army, I was under the command of the head of the SED at that particular section. So that was a captain, and there was a lieutenant, and there was a sergeant, and the rest of us were PFCs, and we finally got upgraded someplace along the line. So anytime we were not at work, we were under the command of those Army people. At work, as I said, I had a civilian supervisor. His name was Beecher Briggs, and he reported to the head of chemical engineering. His name was Miles Leverett, and they reported to the director of the laboratory. So I was part of the scientific staff at Oak Ridge, what was called Clinton Laboratories, which eventually became Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
So you really had two sets of bosses.
I had two sets of bosses, sure.
Was there any particular incident that was rather frightening? Any near misses or any scares or?
The scares we had was because we thought the Germans were beating us in producing an atomic bomb. So there was always some rumor going around that the Germans may be ahead of us in a particular part of the process. That was the only thing that was frightening about the entire experience. And then, of course, when we had VE Day, VJ Day, there was a tremendous joy at the war being over.
Do you ever keep in touch with any of the men you worked with, or in your outfit?
I did. Unfortunately, several of them have since passed away. There's almost no one now that I keep in touch with that I was directly in my outfit.
The day the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, do you recall where you were, the reaction, and how everybody reacted?
There was a general reaction among the entire group that somehow or other we did it. Now there was always some concern that even though we did it, what have we let loose? So that feeling occurred both in the military and on the civilian side to many other people in the staff.
Have you ever had any regrets about being associated with the atomic bomb?
No, I have not. As far as I'm concerned, we saved a lot of lives.
Correct. Well, you left Oak Ridge in 1946, right?
Right.
And you left the Army at the same time?
No, even though I was discharged from the Army, I stayed on at Oak Ridge as a civilian for another 4 or 5 months.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
With the same job. I could just move out of the barracks and move into one of the houses at Oak Ridge.
I'm sure that was nicer.
That was much nicer. And there were about 5 fellows that jointly rented a house.
Then you went and you finished off your degrees.
Right.
Oak Ridge, did you feel that it really contributed a great deal to your expertise and your success.
It did. It was.
Did you get the GI Bill?
Sure, I did. I got the GI Bill. That's how I was paid for my time at Columbia University.
And you also learned a lot during this period. So it
was the basis for my entire career.
Have you done much talking about your experiences there? Have you?
Not in a public way, but of course, every time I get together with another veteran of some kind, we exchange Army experiences, so I tell mine.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like people to know about?
Only that, at least for those of us that were fortunate enough to be there, it was a tremendous learning experience.
Anything else?
That's about it.
That should do it. Well, I want to thank you. Thank you very much for your time, and I think we'll check this and see if it's working, and that's it.